It began with a sealed envelope delivered under extraordinary protocol, an envelope so sensitive that even senior palace aides were denied access. Within hours, whispers raced through royal corridors. King Charles had signed something involving Meghan, something tied directly to Princess Diana's most treasured jewels. What started as a rumor soon became a royal earthquake that no amount of palace silence could contain. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the document arrived quietly, handled with a level of care usually reserved for matters touching the deepest nerve of the crown. It was not spoken about openly. It was not passed casually from desk to desk. Those familiar with palace procedure whispered that staff were told only one thing: do not ask, do not repeat, do not speculate. But silence has a strange power inside royal walls. The less the palace said, the louder the rumors became. By evening, Meghan's name had surfaced again and again, attached to one of the most emotionally charged subjects in modern royal history: Princess Diana's tiara collection. For the monarchy, those jewels were never simply diamonds, pearls, or silver frames locked away in guarded rooms. They were memory. They were pain. They were Diana's shadow still moving through the institution that once struggled to contain her. And now, according to insider whispers, King Charles had taken a step so final that even senior courtiers were left stunned. Why now? Why this order? Why seal it so tightly that even trusted aides were reportedly kept outside the circle? The answer seemed to reach far beyond Meghan herself. It touched inheritance, legitimacy, and the fragile question of who has the right to carry Diana's legacy forward. Some palace voices reportedly saw the order as protection. Others saw it as punishment. But all agreed on one thing: once Charles placed his name on that sealed directive, the battle over Diana's jewels was no longer gossip. It became a declaration. And behind that declaration was a deeper fear inside the monarchy. A fear that the symbols of the crown could be pulled into personal conflict, media wars, and old wounds that had never truly healed. The tiaras were too powerful, Diana's name was too sacred. Meghan's connection to that legacy was too explosive. So the palace moved in silence, and Charles, weakened by years of pressure yet still king, reportedly chose the institution over hesitation. But the sealed order was only the final chapter of a conflict that had been quietly building behind palace walls for years. Long before the sealed order appeared, the jewels themselves carried a story filled with symbolism, sacrifice, and heartbreak. These were not ordinary royal accessories. They were artifacts linked forever to Diana's legacy, each piece carrying memories that still shaped the future of the monarchy decades after her death. To understand why this alleged order caused such panic, one must understand what Diana's jewels represented. They were not just objects locked inside royal records or preserved for formal occasions. They were pieces of a life the public never stopped mourning. Every tiara connected to Diana carried more than beauty. It carried memory, pain, glamour, rejection, survival, and the unfinished story of a woman who became larger than the institution that once tried to control her. That is why even the smallest whisper about access to those jewels could shake the palace more deeply than a public scandal. For decades, Diana's image remained tied to royal jewels in a way few figures could ever match. Her sparkle was never only about diamonds, it was about defiance. When she wore pieces linked to the crown or to her own family heritage, she seemed to turn them into symbols of strength, almost as if she were speaking without saying a word. And after her death, that silence became even louder. The jewels became part of the national memory, something people guarded emotionally, even if they never owned them. Inside royal tradition, access to historic jewelry is never casual. It is not simply about preference, popularity, or personal desire. It is about rank, duty, timing, and trust. Every appearance carries meaning. Every heirloom tells the world who is being prepared, who is being favored, and who stands close to the center of power. That is why Catherine's role became so important. As the future queen, she was not merely wearing jewels when chosen for royal occasions. She was carrying continuity. She was showing that Diana's legacy, painful as it was, could be folded back into the future of the crown with dignity. But this created an uncomfortable question. Who should be allowed near that legacy? Should Diana's symbols remain tied only to working royal duty? Or could they be pulled into personal battles beyond palace control? Reports suggest this question had been quietly discussed for years, especially as public fascination with Diana never faded. Her name still carried emotional force. Her memory still drew loyalty, and any person connected to her story could instantly gain sympathy, attention, and power. That was what made the Tiara collection so sensitive. It was history, yes, but it was also influence. It was not only about who touched the jewels, it was about who could claim the meaning behind them. And once that meaning became a weapon, the palace reportedly understood that silence was no longer enough. Yet while the jewels represented history to some, others reportedly viewed them as symbols of status, and that difference would ignite a serious royal dispute. For years, palace observers sensed an invisible fault line running through the family. Public smiles often concealed private disagreements, and insiders increasingly whispered that the question of royal legacy was becoming impossible to ignore. Then came a series of developments that reportedly transformed quiet tension into open concern. The distance between the Sussexes and the senior royals did not appear overnight. It widened slowly, painfully, through interviews, memoirs, public statements, and moments that left the palace choosing silence when every instinct demanded response. Each new chapter seemed to pull the family further from trust, and beneath the headlines, a deeper fear began to grow. This was no longer only about personal hurt. It was about what could happen when royal symbols, royal memories, and royal heirlooms became part of an outside narrative the palace could not control. Reports suggest that courtiers grew especially cautious whenever Diana's name entered the conversation. Her legacy remained emotionally powerful, and any link to her carried enormous public weight. For William, that legacy was deeply personal. For Charles, it was complicated, painful, and impossible to separate from the history of the crown. For Catherine, it represented both responsibility and restraint. But for the institution itself, Diana's memory had become something fragile, beloved by the public, protected by history, and dangerous if handled carelessly. That is why the question of future access reportedly began troubling senior figures. Who would inherit the symbolism? Who would be trusted with it? And could anyone outside the working structure of the monarchy be allowed to use those symbols without reopening wounds the family had spent years trying to contain? Palace insiders allegedly discussed long-term protections not as an act of cruelty but as an act of survival. Because in royal life, a tiara is never only a tiara. It is a message. It says who belongs, who represents continuity, and who is being placed before the nation as part of the living crown. Charles, already facing pressure from every side, reportedly found himself at the center of an impossible choice. As father, he was tied to private emotion. As king, he was bound to public duty. And those two roles began pulling him in opposite directions. Traditionalists around the monarchy reportedly warned that hesitation could create confusion for future generations. If the line was not drawn now, they feared the meaning of Diana's legacy could become blurred, contested, even weaponized. So the whispers grew sharper, the discussions became more serious. The old guard began pressing for clarity, and as the palace watched the gap between family emotion and royal responsibility widen, one truth became harder to deny. The crown could not leave Diana's most powerful symbols exposed to uncertainty. As concerns mounted, influential figures inside the institution reportedly began considering measures that few believed would ever become necessary. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly shifted from concern to action. What had once been theoretical suddenly became urgent. Meetings were held, documents reviewed, legal advisors consulted, and according to multiple royal watchers, a plan began taking shape that would permanently redefine access to one of Diana's most treasured legacies. The palace had reached the point where silence was no longer enough. For years, the safest answer had been delay. Delay the questions. Delay the decisions. Delay the emotional storm that came whenever Diana's name was pulled back into royal conflict. But delay can become dangerous when symbols are at stake. And according to insiders, senior advisors began reviewing old arrangements with a new kind of seriousness, searching through tradition, inheritance expectations, and the quiet rules that decide who may stand near the most sacred pieces of royal memory. Legal minds were reportedly brought into the discussion, not to turn grief into paperwork, but to protect the crown from confusion. The central question was not who wanted the jewels. It was who could be trusted to carry their meaning without turning them into a private weapon. That distinction mattered. Ownership was one thing, preservation was another, and palace figures allegedly argued that Diana's jewels belonged, emotionally and symbolically, to the future of the monarchy, not to any personal campaign, public grievance, or outside narrative. As the conversations deepened, Charles reportedly received advice from trusted figures who understood both the weight of family pain and the cold demands of kingship. He was not being asked to erase Diana's memory. He was being asked to guard it. And guarding it meant facing a truth he had long tried to avoid. The monarchy could not afford uncertainty around its most powerful symbols. Not when every jewel, every appearance, and every rumored request could be read by the world as a statement of approval, rejection, forgiveness, or defeat. That is where Catherine and William's future roles became impossible to ignore. William carried Diana's bloodline into the next reign. Catherine carried the discipline of a future queen, the careful restraint that makes royal symbolism feel steady instead of reckless. Together, they represented continuity. Not drama, not personal revenge, continuity. And in palace terms, that single word can carry more force than any argument. So long-standing protocols were reportedly re-examined with sharper eyes. Who had access? Under what conditions? Through which office? With whose approval? What once seemed too sensitive to touch now became too important to leave vague. Momentum gathered quietly, then quickly. A defensive measure began to resemble a royal line in the sand. And once that line was drawn, there would be no easy way back for anyone standing outside it. But even as plans advanced, few expected the final decision to arrive with such speed or such finality. Then came the moment that changed everything. In what insiders describe as one of the most significant private royal decisions in recent memory, King Charles reportedly approved a sealed directive concerning Diana's tiara collection. The consequences were immediate, and the message behind the decision appeared impossible to misunderstand. According to palace whispers, the order was not treated like an ordinary internal note. It was handled as a defining act of royal control, the kind of decision that closes doors before the public even knows those doors existed. Charles, after years of hesitation, had reportedly placed his authority behind a single instruction. Diana's most treasured tiara legacy would remain protected inside the working future of the crown. And within that framework, Meghan was allegedly removed from any future access consideration. The secrecy surrounding the order only made it more explosive. Senior palace officials were reportedly informed after the decision had already been approved, a detail that stunned those who believed such a sensitive matter would move slowly through layers of consultation. But this was not slow. This was not soft. This was firm, deliberate, and final. It suggested that the palace no longer wanted debate, it wanted clarity. And clarity, in royal language, can be more devastating than open confrontation. Courtiers reportedly interpreted the move as a message about priorities. The crown first, legacy first, duty first, personal grievance. For some inside the institution, the directive was seen as a protective shield around Diana's memory. For others, it carried the sharp edge of exclusion, a private reminder that royal symbols are not borrowed for attention and not handed over to those standing outside the daily burden of service. It was a decision wrapped in silence, but its meaning traveled fast. Once rumors began circling beyond palace walls, public speculation grew fierce. Was this about Meghan alone, or was it part of a wider tightening of royal access? Was Charles acting from personal pain, institutional pressure, or fear that Diana's image could be pulled into another storm? Every question led to another, and each answer seemed to reveal a deeper fracture within the family. The debate quickly became more than jewelry. It became about fairness, loyalty, rank, and who truly has the right to carry the emotional weight of Diana's name. Family reaction reportedly became the next great mystery. William's position was assumed to be central. Catherine's future role was seen as strengthened. Harry's response, if any, remained clouded in speculation. And Meghan, whose name had become tied to the order through whispers and reports, now stood at the heart of a battle she could not easily answer without making the story even larger. Yet the real impact of the order would only become clear once reactions from across the royal world began to emerge. The announcement may have remained private, but its effects reportedly spread through royal circles almost immediately. Conversations intensified. Alliances were scrutinized, and many began asking whether the decision reflected a single issue or a broader transformation underway within the monarchy itself. Inside palace circles, the first reaction was said to be silence, not calm silence, but the heavy kind that follows a decision everyone understands but few dare to discuss openly. Reports suggest some courtiers viewed the order as overdue, a necessary protection around Diana's legacy after years of tension, accusation, and public division. To them, the message was simple. The crown would decide who carries its symbols, not outside pressure, not popularity, and not emotional blackmail. It was a hard line, but in their eyes, it was a line that had to be drawn. Among traditional royal voices, support reportedly grew quickly. They saw William and Catherine as the natural future custodians of Diana's memory within the working monarchy. William carried the personal bond, the grief, the bloodline. Catherine carried the discipline, patience, and public trust needed to wear royal symbolism without turning it into spectacle. Together, they represented continuity at a time when the family seemed pulled apart by old wounds and new battles. And in that sense, the sealed order appeared less like punishment and more like protection. But not everyone saw it that way. Those sympathetic to Meghan reportedly questioned whether exclusion only deepened the divide. They argued that Diana's story belonged emotionally to both of her sons, and that any move connected to her jewels would inevitably reopen pain around Harry's place in the family. That was the danger Charles faced. Every decision about Diana carried more than protocol. It carried grief. It carried history. It carried the shadow of a broken family still trying to decide what could be repaired and what was already beyond rescue. As media attention grew, the debate widened. Was this about jewels or about control? Was it about protecting heritage or about closing the door on reconciliation? Charles' leadership came under renewed examination because the order seemed to reveal a king no longer willing to leave sensitive questions unresolved. For some, that made him stronger. For others, it made him colder. Yet the pressure around him was undeniable. A monarch cannot rule by feeling alone. He must also guard the symbols that hold the institution together. Public interest soon reached new heights because Diana's name still has unmatched power. Decades later, the mention of her jewels can stir emotion faster than any palace statement. And now those jewels had become the center of a deeper royal reckoning. Behind the whispers was one chilling truth. The monarchy was changing, and this order may have marked the moment when private family sympathy finally gave way to institutional survival. As emotions rose and opinions hardened, attention shifted toward one crucial question: what would this mean for the monarchy moving forward? Sometimes a single decision reveals far more than the issue it appears to address. What began as a dispute over access to treasured jewels now seemed to represent something much larger: a struggle over identity, continuity, and the future direction of the crown itself. The sealed order, according to palace whispers, became a symbol of where the monarchy was heading. It suggested that Charles was no longer simply reacting to crises as they came. He was trying to build boundaries before the next storm arrived. After years of public strain, private sorrow, and competing claims over memory, the crown appeared to be choosing structure over emotion. And in that choice, tradition returned to the center of the story. For the old guard, royal tradition is not decoration, it is survival. It tells the public that the institution is bigger than any one argument, any one interview, any one wounded relationship. That is why Diana's jewels mattered so deeply. They were tied to love and loss, but they were also tied to the future. If they appeared in the wrong context, worn for the wrong reason, or attached to the wrong message, the palace feared their meaning could shift forever. The order reportedly made one thing clear: Diana's legacy would not be allowed to drift outside the line of royal duty. This is where Catherine's position grew stronger without a single public announcement. As future queen, she stood at the meeting point of memory and monarchy. She could honor Diana without competing with her. She could carry the symbols without turning them into a personal claim. That quiet discipline reportedly mattered to those who believed the crown needed calm more than spectacle. Catherine's strength was not in demanding access, it was in waiting until duty placed it in her hands. William's future reign also entered the discussion in a deeper way. He is Diana's son, but he is also the next Prince of Wales moving toward kingship. Every symbol connected to his mother will one day become part of the emotional foundation of his reign. Charles, facing uncertainty and pressure, reportedly understood that he had to stabilize that future while he still could. The order was not just about today, it was about the reign after him, the children after William, and the story the monarchy would tell for decades. Historic precedents made the decision feel less sudden than it first appeared. The crown has always protected its most powerful objects through rules, hierarchy, and controlled access. Jewels, titles, residences, and honors are never neutral. They reveal who is trusted and who remains outside the inner circle. In this case, legacy became the defining issue, because Diana's name still carried more emotional force than almost any royal title. And as the palace reportedly looked ahead, the choice became brutally simple: protect the meaning now or risk losing control of it later. But the deeper meaning of the order was not about jewels at all, it was about who would ultimately carry Diana's legacy into the future. In the end, the story was never simply about a tiara collection. It was about memory, legacy, duty, and the difficult choices that come when personal relationships collide with institutional responsibility. The sealed order may remain hidden from public view, but the message behind it now echoes throughout the royal family. Diana's influence did not fade with time, it changed form. It moved from public grief into royal symbolism, from old photographs into living memory, from personal heartbreak into the emotional foundation of a future reign. That is why every decision connected to her name still carries such force. The jewels linked to her were never cold objects. They became vessels of feeling, reminders of what the monarchy lost, what it survived, and what it still struggles to explain. Charles' reported decision, harsh as some may see it, can be understood as an act of preservation. Not simple rejection, not revenge, preservation. A king facing uncertainty had to decide whether Diana's most powerful symbols should remain protected within the working line of the crown or risk becoming part of another public battle. And in that moment, according to palace whispers, duty won. The personal pain remained, but the institution came first. For future generations, that matters. Royal heirlooms are not handed down like ordinary family possessions. They carry messages across decades. A tiara can speak of loyalty, rank, sacrifice, and trust without one official word being spoken. That is why Catherine and William now stand so central to this story. William carries Diana's blood and memory into the monarchy's future. Catherine carries the discipline of a woman expected to guard that memory with restraint, dignity, and steadiness. Together they represent the path the palace appears determined to protect. Yet the tension has not disappeared. It waits beneath the surface. Harry's connection to Diana remains real. Meghan's place in the wider family remains debated. Charles' choices continue to be judged by those who see duty and those who see division. Nothing about this story is clean, nothing is painless. That is what makes it so powerful. It is not merely a royal decision. It is a reminder that the crown often survives by making choices no family would ever want to make. And so the sealed order becomes more than a document. It becomes a warning, a boundary, and a statement of identity. Diana's legacy will remain adored by millions, questioned by many, and guarded by those who believe the monarchy's future depends on protecting its most sacred symbols from confusion. The silence around the order may continue, but silence inside the palace has never meant emptiness. Sometimes it means the decision has already been made. And while the sealed document may never be fully revealed, its impact on Diana's legacy and the future of the monarchy may be felt for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.